안녕하세요. 제 이름은 MERED입니다. President Marky Jong, 에무다에서 이야기하게 도에서 영광입니다. And I'm sorry for the pronunciation. I did my best. So I'll be presenting how France has managed to develop a hydrogen sector. But as we said maybe yesterday, for those who were here during the panel we had yesterday morning, France has been looking at hydrogen for a long time. And while our lawyers get happy with my disclaimer, just let me share with you once again that the very first public policy that we had around hydrogen in France dates back to 1799. And at the time, it was for the public lighting of the Paris city. So it dates way back. But of course, we're now into modern day hydrogen. And what I specialize in is hydrogen geopolitics. And my big question is, as a country or as a local region or as a city environment, as we discussed just now with Edmonton, how do you stand out as everybody more or less becomes interested in hydrogen? So at this point, I've counted 71 countries in the world that either have an official national hydrogen strategy. These are the countries in green on this map. And many more countries either having an unofficial hydrogen strategy or currently developing one at various levels and for various ambitions. So how would a country like France or a country like Korea stand out amongst these 71 countries? And the reason why we have more and more and more is because right after the Paris Agreement vis-a-vis the fight against climate change in 2015, there's been some kind of a hydrogen epiphany all across the world. And the reason why that is due to favorable market conditions, technological breakthroughs, absolutely, but also to the fact that many decision makers from the public and private sectors have realized that hydrogen energy, H2E, or hydrogen derivatives, H2D, can actually tackle three climate policy factors all at once: wealth, creating wealth or sustaining wealth, reducing energy intensity in the economy, and reducing carbon intensity in the economy as well. So that's the reason why we have so much. And if I were to build some kind of a general mapping of the reasons why people go into hydrogen now, countries, governments, municipalities, and of course the private sector, it's because with hydrogen as a policy, you can deploy things that can have these four aspects positively responded to: scalability, security, saleability of new solutions to fight climate change, of course, and sovereignty. So, of course, here we need to make a distinction between security and sovereignty in the way countries are framing their market right now in hydrogen. But, well, we don't have time to dig deeper into that. Let's just say that in France and in Korea, we're not bad at doing so. We tend to consider hydrogen both from a security perspective and from a scalability, sovereignty, etc. perspective. So we have two of the world's most ambitious strategies in hydrogen. But if we go now down to the European level, and especially to the European Union level, so the 27 members, France has a strategy, a national one, since 2020. It was passed as part of the recovery plans post-coronavirus, and 9.1 billion euros have been promised by the government to fund these low-carbon hydrogen transition. These 9.1 billion euros are all dedicated to low-carbon hydrogen. And in France, when we talk about low-carbon hydrogen, we talk about renewable hydrogen or hydrogen coming out of a nuclear supply chain. But we don't talk about blue hydrogen, or what I mean, these 9 billion euros are not made for blue hydrogen whatsoever. We've created a National Hydrogen Council. The business sector has created a National Hydrogen Task Force on the steering committee of which I have the privilege of sitting. And we have now a interministerial National Hydrogen Coordinator as well. The idea is to deliver by 2030 these 3 targets. Have 6.5 gigawatt of green hydrogen production capacity in France, regardless of whether we're talking about a fully green renewable supply chain or nuclear. We also look into natural hydrogen. So that's something we don't forget at all. And then the idea is to save 6 million tons of CO2 per year and to create 50 to 150,000 jobs nationwide. Once again, this is a factor here that you can compare easily to Korea, since we have a population that is pretty much the same. Well, pretty much the same, a few million apart. So our ambition is to create less jobs than Korea, but maybe high-value jobs as well. Another thing that France was very good at, and here I mean the companies, not really the government, was to create or participate to the creation of the International Hydrogen Institutional Building. Meaning, it's French companies that were together with Japanese and Korean companies at the creation of the Hydrogen Council. The Hydrogen TCP, the Hydrogen Technology Collaboration Program, is headquartered in Paris at the IEA's headquarters and is currently chaired by a French researcher. In Hydrogen Europe, once again, French companies are very much influential and so on. And of course, in terms of trade shows, Hyvolution in France is kind of the equivalent to H2 Meet, in the sense that it is the largest hydrogen trade show now in Europe, or amongst the top 2, because Germany is picking up. So that's where we stand. And then if we go down to some subnational level, what you will find is a lot of H2 basins or H2 valleys or H2 ecosystems all across the country. And what's very interesting is that each and every one of them has a specialty, has a particular expertise. And that is why right now when we talk about hydrogen as a possibility in France, actually we talk about a very much vertically integrated and also a very much horizontally integrated value chain. Because definitely, whether you look at large groups in various kinds of sectors, being either energy producers, energy transporters, or end-use off-takers, whether you look at startup companies, SMEs, whether you look at public spin-off companies as well, whether you look at renewable hydrogen, whether you look at blue hydrogen, whether you look at so-called turquoise hydrogen out of pyrolysis, nuclear hydrogen, or even natural, you will find French companies, French interlocutors to develop something with. And of course, for all of these things, and that's very important, we've just talked about it as well for the Edmonton case, you've got a talent pool that is emerging, because in all of these ecosystems or basins, you will find universities, research centers, specializing in one part or the other of this hydrogen industry. So that's the reason why, for example, when the European Commission last month decided to allow European governments to finance directly large projects of common European interests in hydrogen, what you found is that the majority of companies that were awarded projects were French, even though we're not the largest economy or largest country in Europe. And here, we talked about it yesterday, for those who were here, and President Macron talked about it in a speech 2 days ago. There's a kind of a, not misunderstanding, but kind of a hiatus between what the national government wants at this point vis-à-vis hydrogen, what the local governments or the municipal governments want, and what the business sector wants. The French government says if we want to deliver on the objectives of the strategy and also to emancipate ourselves from energy dependencies that we've had with suppliers in the past, then we need to produce the hydrogen as much as possible in France. And not in Spain, not in Denmark, not in the Netherlands, but in France. And of course, not even outside of the European Union. But the regional governments or the municipalities, what they're saying is that's a very good idea. Because indeed, if we produce locally, then we will create jobs, we will build those ecosystems and so on and so forth. But maybe in 10 or 15 years' time, when we have Chile, Australia, Namibia, Morocco, Saudi Arabia providing cheap hydrogen to the market, green hydrogen, of course, cheap green hydrogen, then basically if, for example, in Dijon or in Nantes, we can produce hydrogen at maybe 4 euros a kilo, but I have some green hydrogen coming from Chile at, say, 2 euros a kilo, then is it going to be still interesting to produce the hydrogen locally? That's the debate we have right now in France. And I know that in Korea too, you have this kind of debate to some extent. So definitely maybe we can share best practices in terms of this debate. But anyway, companies, big or small, they're saying we want to go international. And they want the French government to harness the globality, meaning the internationalness, so to speak, of this hydrogen market. Especially when we look at Africa. So what you can see on the left-hand side of the slide here is a study that was done by IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, earlier this year on the geopolitics of hydrogen. They've studied this very, very much carefully, and they believe that cheap hydrogen, so hydrogen that can be produced under 1.5 US dollars per kilogram, will be mostly produced in North Africa, the Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, France has a lot of ties with the African continent, sometimes with good aspects, sometimes with bad aspects, but that's not the problem here. The problem is France doesn't have an international hydrogen strategy. And the companies are saying, we want to go to Africa, we want to be the technological suppliers, we want to produce hydrogen there. And if the French government could welcome hydrogen imports, then it would enable a lot of things. Now, the French government doesn't. So maybe there's a partnership to be made here between French companies operating in Africa or willing to develop hydrogen in Africa and other hydrogen client states like Germany, like the Netherlands, or like Korea, of course, to actually kickstart in a multilateral or trilateral or quadrilateral approach this whole business and value chain. But in any case, there's even closer business to be done with North Africa, because definitely when we talk about producing green hydrogen in North Africa and importing it in Europe, what we're talking about is not really a maritime business. What we're talking about is mostly a pipelines business. And here, France has a very important role to play as well, because if you want to import green hydrogen, say from Morocco or from Egypt or from Tunisia or Algeria to Germany, then with your pipe, you will have, at some point, you will have to go to France if you use the Western route in Europe. If you go to Spain, then you have to cross France to get to Germany. So here, France has a role to play. And once again, there are some debates at the European level on that aspect. And that's the reason why countries like Italy or Greece are now picking up the fight, and they're saying the competition, and they're saying, well, it seems complicated to use the Western import route, so use us, Greece or Italy, to import your hydrogen to Germany. So in a nutshell, the fight that we have right now in Europe, and we've had that for a few years already, is on the one hand, France and a group of 6 or 7 states versus Germany and a group of more than 15 states. That's what we've got right now. France says, if we want to import hydrogen, it has to be hydrogen that is produced out of renewables or nuclear power, if you like, but it has to be very, very low carbon. Germany, and together with Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and so on, Austria, are saying, we don't care. We want the hydrogen as long as it's low carbon. And if it's blue or turquoise, made out of fossil fuels, we just need it. So that's where we stand. And right now in Europe, vis-a-vis the hydrogen taxonomy building, this is at the heart of every debate. And Germany has kind of they're a step forward, to be honest. Because since France doesn't have this international hydrogen strategy, then basically at this point, that's as of August 2022, France only has 2 bilateral partnerships on hydrogen, on green hydrogen, with the UAEs and with Colombia. And they're even a bit fragile, to be perfectly comprehensive. Germany, as you can see here, has more than 12 bilateral partnerships with countries that would supply low carbon hydrogen to Germany. So, why are we late in the game? Well, it's because when we talk about this fourth aspect, the fourth S here in my matrix, sovereignty, in France, what we mean is actually autonomy and reindustrialization. We want to bring jobs back. We want to bring technologies back. That's why we've seen French companies, for example, go to China, buy electrolyzer companies out of China, and bring the electrolyzer technology back to France and basically put it on steroids to be even more efficient. That's what's happened in the past few years. For us, that's what we put, as French, that's what we put behind sovereignty. And the European Union, slowly, but the Ukraine war, of course, has accelerated this fact. The idea that hydrogen can be a sovereignty development is also becoming front and center in the debate, not just in France, also in the German hydrogen club, so to speak, club of countries. Because these are the raw figures. Right now, in 2021, we've imported close to half of our natural gas supply from Russia, close to half of our coal supply from Russia, 1/4 of our oil supply from Russia as well. We need to get rid of this if we want to be more sovereign. And to do that, the European Commission has passed the Repower EU package back in May 2022, so just 3 months after the beginning of the war, to say we need by 2030 to reduce our fossil fuel consumption by 155 billion cubic meters. Precisely what we've imported from Russia. We need to get rid of that. And that's where hydrogen comes into play. That's the reason why all targets for hydrogen in Europe were raised massively. What we had before Repower EU was a EU-wide target to have 6.5 million tons of hydrogen produced domestically in Europe by 2030, approximately. Now what we want is to have 10 million tons per annum of hydrogen produced within the EU and 10 million tons produced outside the EU, for example, in Norway, for example, in the United Kingdom, or in the MENA or African regions, or South America or Canada by 2030. These are our targets. So there's the climate urgency, there's the geopolitical urgency, and then at the subnational level, if I go back to the subnational level, well, there's an eagerness from the local governments, from the electorates, the constituents. They say, we want to see this hydrogen thing happening. You've been talking about this hydrogen dream for decades. French companies like Air Liquide, like Airbus, and so on, they've been talking about hydrogen for a long time. Constituents want to see hydrogen buses, hydrogen trolleys, hydrogen cars, and so on, because that's concrete. And that's the reason why every single regional government in France has a hydrogen strategy. That's the reason why we have 19 officially recognized by the national government hydrogen ecosystems all across the country. And that is the reason why also we can leverage, or we are on the verge of leveraging, the French overseas territories located all across the world in close to very interesting markets here and there to actually either produce hydrogen, green hydrogen, at a massive scale. For example, you could do that in French Guiana, in Latin America. You could do that in New Caledonia, of course. So you can produce hydrogen and export it, for example, to Korea. Or maybe just simply developing intercontinental yet domestic supply chains. For example, from Guadeloupe, where I come from, to mainland France. So that's where we stand, and that is how France is becoming a hydrogen nation slowly but surely. 감사합니다.